start the story. This actually, I teach composition at UIC, and sometimes students make these insane typos that give me ideas. And this student actually started writing about the odious complex. And how, so that got me thinking, like, odious Rex, what a great name. So I decided to write a story called Odious Rex. The student never knew. She also talked about how Celine Dion was going to use her hand gestures to attack the audience. It's a really surreal piece of writing, unintentionally for us, but it's pretty fucking great. Alright. So anyway. And this is also, it's fiction, but a lot of it's true. I did drive a sandwich truck, and I did get in a fight with the homeless guys. Odious Rex was driving a roach coach when he met Nicole. They had the same last stop, a spot on Northwestern's downtown campus, right between the hospital entrance and the buildings that housed classrooms for the law and business students. Odious sold Fontano's sandwiches to the 20 and 30-something students and the older faculty, patients, and doctors from the hospital, and construction workers from nearby construction sites. Nicole drove the pasta bowl truck, and at first Odious parked beside her when he could, since she was beautiful, and it meant more customers for him. Though sometimes the fat man who drove the jerk chicken truck would get the other spot if Odious was running late. Odious and Nicole began to bum each other cigarettes when there were no customers, and they talked about her ex, Kevin, who was a junkie, and sort of falling apart, or about whether she'd make it as an actress. Kevin used to drive a Fontano's truck before Odious started. He'd been fired for disappearing in the morning with a truck full of sandwiches, and not being found until 72 hours later. A truck full of sandwiches, all unsold, and ruinous, to hear Odious's boss tell it. It was hot that summer, and they both kept the windows down at all times, playing music for each other. Odious liked to play the afternoon rock show on WNUR, and Nicole would bop around the top 40 stations, finding songs that drove Odious crazy because he couldn't admit how much he liked them. On the ends of the very best days, they'd end up singing lines back and forth, while that last of the customers laughed and shook their heads, some of them joining in the game too. And it was on the first of those days that Nicole asked Odious to come over later and drink with her. Nicole lived near Belmont and Clark, and Odious started taking the number 8 bus to see her at night. Her apartment was above a commercial space and on the top floor. 2 older women lived beneath her and were constantly complaining about the noise Nicole made, drinking and listening to records at all hours of the night. Odious lived in Pilsen, and the ride to Belmont was enjoyable to him. He'd try to sit close to the back of the bus and get a window seat if at all possible. Sometimes he'd wear his headphones and listen to sad bastard music and hum along while he looked at the people on the sidewalk. A lot of times he'd listen to the red-headed stranger, and those times would make him sad, so much so that he'd arrive at Nicole's acting a little hangdog, and she'd sing to him to cheer him up. She had a bright, clean voice and was a theater student at UIC during the school year. The song she'd sing was Frank Mills, and usually by the time it was over, Odious was grinning, and then he'd grab her around the waist and pull her to him, and that was that. This is precisely how the two had consummated their relationship, ending up on the wooden floor, half undressed and giggling, when Nicole's sister came home and caught them. One morning, Odious had just loaded the truck and was turning onto Wabash to drive to his first stop near Greektown. A slender, middle-aged man wearing a green backpack was walking south down the street, in the middle of Odious's lane, and he honked his horn and yelled at the man to get the hell out of the road. The man spun around and ran at the truck, kicking the door. Odious jammed the parking brake on and threw open the truck door. It was 7:45 in the morning. Odious cursed at the man. There was little traffic, and when Odious called the man a sawed-off motherfucker, the man's eyes changed, and he came at Odious, throwing a punch. Odious realized his mistake then. He thought the man to be an older student, perhaps walking to a summer class at Roosevelt or Columbia, but he was a transient. Odious was a bit baffled, and it took him a moment to realize that the man was swinging with his left hand exclusively. He was in his late 50s, and very slow. It must have proved quite a sight to the people inside the cars that began to accumulate behind Odious's roach coach. The man with the green pack would swing from his ankles, and Odious would duck the punch and push him backwards. The man was incoherent, but yelling anyway. He'd punch, and Odious ducked and shoved. Punch, duck, shove. Finally, the man grew tired, and his eyes changed again. He turned and started to walk away, readjusting his backpack. Odious chased after him and kicked the man in the ass. He told him to stay out of the goddamn road, you no-count son of a bitch. The man spun and dashed at the roach coach, kicking the passenger's door viciously. And then he and Odious were entangled again, once more with the crazy vagrant throwing wild roundhouse punches with his left hand, while Odious shoved him away and screamed for him to back down before I beat your old ass. Wow. Odious was growing angry, and the cars blocked by his truck had grown tired of the free show and began to honk. Finally, the man grew exhausted again, and he walked away. Odious was behind for the rest of the day. At each of his morning stops, he told the construction workers in line what had happened, and they laughed and slapped Odious on the shoulder, told him that he was the crazy one, and tipped him a quarter or two when they paid. By the time he got to his last stop, the story had grown into a tight little narrative, and Odious delivered it to Nicole like he was on stage at some nightclub. The people in her line gasped. Some of them left the line. Some laughed awkwardly and looked away. Some ruddy patches appeared on Nicole's throat. She told Odious to go to his truck and sell his sandwiches and not to come back to her again. Odious was baffled at her response. He stood gaping. At the end of the day, Nicole drove off without talking to Odious. He took his truck back to the store and unloaded it. He felt furious and didn't call Nicole to ask her why she was so upset. He went to his apartment and climbed the 3 long flights of stairs to the door of his studio. He straightened the room up and swept and mopped the floor. He showered and shaved and slicked back his hair with pomade. It was stifling in the apartment, and Odious began to sweat. He turned the box fan in his window on high and opened a window in the kitchen and could feel a cross-draft almost immediately. He spit and watched it fall into the alley below. The sky looked gauzy, and the Sears Tower loomed above the lofts across the street. Odious called his boss and told him he wouldn't be coming in the morning, and then went outside. It was night by then, and Odious stood there on the cracked sidewalk along Cullerton, eyeing the ghosts of the street lights on Halstead that made it past Terry Plumbing and lit up the glass littering the vacant lot next to his building. The shadows of noise from streams of traffic on Halstead sounded like water trying to wear away rocks that impeded its flow. He went to the Skylark and sat down at the bar and started drinking. He ate a hamburger and some tater tots and listened to the crowd around him. It was an odd mingling of hipsters and artists that lived and worked in the lofts and the storefront studios along the street, and also the older townies who'd been living and working on the south side for years. An older man sat to the right of Odious, drinking canned old style that he poured into a juice glass and sip away to nothing. The bartender was a gray-haired Japanese man who worked steadily. He wore a black and yellow silk tie that looked to Odious to be at least 40 years old. He had a pinochle tie clip and a yellow Bermuda shirt. When he came over to Odious, the man beside him handed a $10 bill over to the bartender and the bartender asked, "Should I play some Ray Price, Paul?" The old man nodded his head and the bartender left. Odious struck up a conversation with the old man. The two grew confidential and muttered things to one another. Paul put his arm around Odious' shoulders and told him that he'd been doing plumbing work in Milwaukee a lot back in the 60s, and he'd go out at night to honky-tonks and watch Ray Price with the crowds of drunks and factory workers. City lights came on, and the old man Paul sang along. He appeared to be very drunk then, and Odious examined his ruined face, the rusticated streaks of ruddy flesh that corrugated his jowl and globular nose. Paul grabbed a tater tot off of Odious' plate and popped it into his mouth, shaking Odious and laughing, and then turning back to the bar and sang again, louder now. Lights that say, forget her love in a different atmosphere. Lights that lure are nothing but a masquerade for tears. They paint a pretty picture, but my arms can't hold them tight, and I just can't say I love you to a street of city lights.